long time ago, I read a book like this. It was called Holes, but the first one was Bliss. It was called The Island of the Blue Dolphins, but the only book I could find was Holes, so let's not say any buts. Hello everyone, my name's Stonesy Boy and welcome to Reading with Stonesy, Education Edition. Now if you're confused why I say Education Edition, this is because Holes is a book read in the American school system and has the most audiobooks. Now, the interesting thing about saying this is the Education Edition is this is technically an educational book. And I have the exact copy you see right there, made by Louis Sacker, whatever. But yeah, this is the first educational book in our line of books. And I don't remember what this teaches, but all I learned from it was margarine jars are delicious. Because that's what the teacher gave us after done reading. So if you're listening to this as an audiobook, tell your teacher to get the jars that are shown here. I'm still gone on my vacation, but after looking at the numbers, I need to start a new book. And well, I want to finish one before I'm back into the school system, so I decided Holes, because it's a short story, at least as short as our pages go. It does run by a chapter system and smells exactly like I thought it would. Oh my goodness, this smell reminds me of my school. Yes, I sniff books. Anyways, we're going to try our best to do pages 1 to 20. But hey, there's probably going to be a problem with that. So let me check real quick. What's page 20? Oh, perfect. Page 1 through 20. It's actually 3 to 20, but whatever. So yeah, without further ado, let's read this really, really small book. And let's begin with Chapter 1. There is no lake at Camp Green Lake. There was once a very large lake here, the largest lake in Texas. That was over 100 years ago. And now there's just a dry, flat wasteland. There used to be a grown of Green Lake as well. The town shriveled and died up along with the lake and the people who lived there. During the summer and the daytime, temperature hovers around 95 degrees in the shade. If you can find any shade, there's not much shade in a big dry lake. The only trees are 2 old oaks on the eastern edge of the lake. A hammock is stretched between the 2 trees and a log cabin against behind that. The campers are forbidden to lie in the hammock. It belongs to the warden. The warden owns the shade. Out on the lake, rattlesnakes and scorpions find shade under rocks and holes dug by the campers. There was a good rule to remember about rattlesnakes and scorpions. If you don't bother them, they won't bother you, usually. Getting bitten by a scorpion or even a rattlesnake is not the worst thing that can happen to you. You won't die, usually. Sometimes a camper will try to be bitten by a scorpion or even a small rattlesnake. Then he will get to spend a day or 2 recovering in his tent, instead of having to dig a hole out on the lake. But you don't want to be bitten by a yellow spotted lizard. That's the worst thing that can happen to you. You will die a slow and painful death, always. If you get bitten by a yellow spotted lizard, you might as well go into the shade of the oak trees and lie in the hammock. There's nothing anyone can do to you anymore. The reader can probably be asking, why does... Chapter 2. The reader is probably asking, why would anyone go to Camp Green Lake? Most campers weren't given a choice. Camp Green Lake is a camp for bad boys. If you take a bad boy and make him dig a hole every day in the hot sun, it will turn them into a good boy. That was the some people's thought. Stanley Yenlitz was given a choice. The judge said, you may go to jail or you may go to Camp Green Lake. Stanley's from a poor family. He had never been to camp before. Chapter 3. Stanley Yelnats was the only passenger on the bus, not counting the driver or the guard. The guard sat next to the driver in a seat around facing Stanley. A rifle lay across his lap. Stanley was sitting about 10 rows back, handcuffed to his armrest. His backpack lay on the seat next to him. It contained his toothbrush, toothpaste, a box of stationery his mother had given him. He promised to write to her at least once a week. He looked out of the window, although there wasn't much to see, mostly fields of hay and cotton. He was on a long bus ride to nowhere. The bus wasn't air-conditioned, and the hot, heavy air was almost stifling as the handcuffs. Stanley and his parents had tried to pretend that he was just going away to camp for a while, just like rich kids do. When Stanley was younger, he used to play with stuffed animals and pretend animals were at camp.
Camp Fun and Games, he called it. Sometimes he had them play soccer with a marble. Other times he'd run obstacle courses or go bungee jumping off the table, tried to boat broken rubber bands. Now Stanley tried to pretend he was going to Camp Fun and Games. Maybe he'd make some friends, he thought. At least he'd get to swim in the lake. He didn't have any friends at home. He was overweight, and the kids at his middle school often teased him about his size. Even his teacher sometimes made cruel comments about it without realizing it. On his last day of school, his math teacher, Mrs. Bell, taught ratios. As an example, he chose the heaviest kid in the class and the lightest kid in the class, and made them weigh themselves. Stanley weighed 3 times as much as the other boy. Mrs. Bell wrote the ratio on the board, 3-1, unaware of how much embarrassment she had caused both of them. Stanley was arrested later that day. He looked at the guard who sat slumped in the seat and wondered how he'd fallen asleep. The guard was wearing sunglasses, so Stanley couldn't see his eyes. Stanley was not a bad kid. He was innocent of the crime for which he was convicted. He had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was all because of that no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. He smiled. It was a family joke. Whenever anything went wrong, they would always blame Stanley's no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. Supposedly, he had a great-great-grandfather who had stolen a pig and one-legged gypsy. Then she put a curse on him and all his descendants. Stanley and his parents didn't believe in curses, of course, but whenever anything went wrong, it felt to be good to be able to blame someone. Things went wrong a lot. They always seemed to be in the wrong place in the wrong time. He looked out the window in the vast emptiness. He watched the rise and fall of the telephone wire. In his mind, he could hear his father's gruff voice softly singing to him. If only, the woodpecker sighs. The bark of the tree was a little bit softer, while the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely. He cries on the moon, if only, if only. It was a song his father used to sing to him. The melody was sweet and sad, but Stanley's favorite part was when his father would howl the word moon. The bus hit a small bump and the guard sat up instantly alert. Stanley's father was an inventor. To be a successful inventor, you have to have 3 things: intelligence, perseverance, and just a little bit of luck. Stanley's father was smart and had lots of perseverance. Once he started a project, he would work on it for years, often going days without sleep. He just never got any luck. Every time an experiment failed, Stanley would hear him cursing his dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-grandfather. Stanley's father was also named Stanley Yelnats. Stanley's father's full name was Stanley Yelnats III. Our Stanley is Stanley Yelnats IV. Everyone in this family had always liked the fact that Stanley Yelnats, his name was spelled frontward and backward. So they kept naming their son Stanley, and Stanley was the only child that was the only other Stanley Yelnats before him. All of them had something else in common. Despite their awful luck, they always remained hopeful. As Stanley's father liked to say, I learned from failure. But perhaps this was some part of curse as well. If Stanley and his father weren't always hopeful, then it wouldn't hurt to do every time their hopes were crushed. Not every day Yelnats had been a failure. Stanley's mother had often pointed out whenever Stanley and his father became too discouraged that they actually started to believe in the curse. The first Stanley Yelnats, Stanley's great-grandfather, had made a fortune in the stock market. He couldn't have been too unlucky. At such time, she neglected to mention the bad luck that befell the first Stanley Yelnats. He lost his entire fortune when he was moving from New York to California. His stagecoach was robbed by the outlaw Kissing Kate Barlow. If it weren't for that, Stanley's family would now be living in a mansion on the beach in California. Instead, they were crammed in a tiny apartment that smelled of burning rubber and foot odor. If only. The apartment smelled the way it did because Stanley's father was trying to invent a way to recycle old sneakers. The first person who finds use for old sneakers, he said, will be a very rich man. It was the latest project that led Stanley's arrest. The bus ride became increasingly bumpy because the road was no longer paved. Actually, Stanley had been impressed when they first found out the great-grandfather was robbed by Kissing Kate Barlow. True, he would have preferred living on the beach in California, but it wasn't kind of cool to have someone in your family robbed by a famous outlaw. Kate Barlow wasn't actually Stanley's great-grandfather. That would have been really cool, but she only kissed the man she killed. Instead, she robbed him and left him stranded in the middle of the desert. He was lucky to have survived, Stanley's mother was quick to point out. The bus was slowing down. The guard grunted as he stretched his arm. Welcome to Camp Green Lake, said the driver. Stanley looked out the dirty window. He couldn't see a lake, and hardly anything was green. Chapter 4. Stanley felt somewhat dazed as the guard unlocked his handcuffs and led him off the bus. He had been on the bus for over 8 hours. Be careful, the bus driver said as Stanley walked down the steps. Stanley wasn't sure if the bus driver meant for him to be careful going down the steps or he was telling him to be careful at Camp Green Lake. Thanks for the ride, he said. His mouth was dry and his throat hurt. He stepped onto the hard, dry dirt. There was a band of sweat around his wrist where the handcuffs had been. The land was barren and desolate. he could see a few run-down buildings from this tent. Farther away, there was only cabin beneath two tall trees. Those trees were the only plant life he could see. They weren't even weeds. The guard led Stanley into a small building. A sign on the front said, "You are entering Camp Green Lake, Juvenile Correctional Facility." Next to it was another sign that declared that it was a violation of Texas Penal Code to bring guns, explosive weapons, drugs, or alcohol into the premises. As Stanley read the sign, he could only help but think, well, duh. The guard led Stanley into the building, where he felt someone welcome relief of air conditioning. A man was sitting on his feet up on a desk. He turned his head, and Stanley and the guard entered, but otherwise didn't move. Even though he was inside, he wore sunglasses and a cowboy hat. He also had a can of soda, and the sight of it made Stanley even more aware of his own thirst. He waited until the bus guard gave the man some papers to sign. "That's a lot of sunflower seed," the bus guard said. Stanley noticed a burlap sack filled with sunflower seeds on the floor next to the desk. "I quit smoking last month," the man in the cowboy hat. He had a tattoo of the rattlesnake on his arm, and was a sign of his name. The snake's rattle seemed to wiggle. "I used to smoke a pack a day, and now I eat a sack of these every week." The guard laughed. There must have been a small refrigerator behind his desk, because the man in the cowboy hat produced 2 more cans of soda. For a second, Stanley hoped that one might be for him, but the man gave one to the guard, and it said that the other one was for the driver. 9 hours here, and now 9 hours back, the guard gumbled. What a day. Stanley thought about the long, miserable bus ride, and felt a little sorry for the guard and the bus driver. The man in the cowboy hat spat sunflower seed shells into the waste paper basket. When he walked down the desk to Stanley, "My name is Mr. Sir," he said. "Whenever you speak to me, you must call me by my name. Is that clear?" Stanley hesitated. Yes, Mr. Sir," he said, though he couldn't imagine that was the only man's name. "You're not in the Girl Scouts anymore," Mr. Sir said. Stanley had to remove his clothes in front of Mr. Sir, who made sure he wasn't hiding anything. He was given 2 sets of clothes and a towel. Each set consisted of a long-sleeve orange jumpsuit, an orange t-shirt, and yellow socks. Stanley wasn't sure if the socks had become yellow originally. He had also given white sneakers, an orange cap, and a canteen made of heavy plastic, which unfortunately was empty. The cap had a piece of cloth sewn to the back of it for neck protection. Stanley got dressed. The clothes smelled like soap. Mr. Sir told him he should wear 1 set to work and 1 set for relaxation. Laundry was done every 3 days. On that day, his work clothes would be washed. Then the other set would become his work clothes, and he would get clean clothes to wear while resting. You are to dig 1 hole each day, including Saturdays and Sundays. Each hole must be 5 feet deep, 5 across in every direction. Your shovel must be measuring stick. Breakfast is served at 4:30. Stanley must have looked surprised, because Mr. Sir went on to explain that he started early to avoid the hottest part of the day. "No one is going to babysit you," he added. "The longer it takes you to dig, the longer you will be out in the sun. If you dug up anything interesting, you are to report it to me or any other counselor. When you finish, the rest of the day is yours." Stanley nodded to show he understood. "This isn't Girl Scout camp," said Mr. Sir. He checked Stanley's backpack and allowed him to keep it. Then he held Stanley outside into a blazing heat. "Take a good look around you," Mr. Sir said. "What do you see?" Stanley looked across the vast wasteland. The air seemed much thick and hay and dirt. "Not much," he said, and then hesitantly said, "Mr. Sir." Mr. Sir laughed. "You see any guard towers?" "No." "How about an electric fence?" "No, Mr. Sir." "There's no fence at all, is there?" "No, Mr. Sir." "You want to run away?" Mr. Sir asked him. Stanley looked back at him, unsure what he meant. "If you want to run away, go ahead. Start running. I'm not going to stop you." Stanley didn't know what kind of game Mr. Sir was playing. "I see you're looking at my gun. Don't worry. I'm not going to shoot you." He tapped his holster. "This is for yellow-spotted lizards. I wouldn't waste a bullet on you." "I'm not going to run away," Stanley said. "Good thinking," said Mr. Sir. "Nobody runs away from here. We don't need a fence. You know why? Because we've got the only water for 100 miles. You want to run away? You'll be a buzzard food in 3 days." Stanley could see some kids dressed in orange and carrying shovels dragging themselves towards the tents. "You thirsty?" asked Mr. Sir. "Yes, Mr. Sir," Stanley said gratefully. "Well, you better get used to it. You're going to be thirsty for the next 18 months. Chapter 5. There were 6 large great tents. Each one had a black letter on it, A, B, C, D, E, or F. The first 5 tents were for the campers. The counselors slept in F. Stanley was assigned to D-tent. Mr. Pendensky was his counselor. "My name is easy to remember," said Mr. Pendensky, as he shook his hand with Stanley just outside the tents. 3 even words. Pen, dance, key. Mr. Sir returned to his office. Mr. Pendensky was younger than Mr. Sir, but not nearly as scary-looking. The top of his head was shaved so close that it was almost bald, but his face was covered in a thick, curly black beard. His nose was badly sunburned. "Mr. Sir isn't really so bad," said Mr. Pendensky. "He's just been in a bad mood ever since he quit smoking. The person you've got to worry about is the warden. There's really only one rule in Camp Green Lake: don't upset the warden. Stanley nodded as if he understood. I want you to know, Stanley, that I respect you, Mr. Budensky said. I understand that you made some bad mistakes in your life, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But everyone makes mistakes. You may have done some bad things, but you never say you're a bad kid. Stanley nodded. It seemed pointless to try to tell his counselor why he was innocent. He figured that everyone probably had said that, and he didn't want Mr. Budensky to think he had a bad attitude. I'm going to help you turn your life around, said his counselor, but you're going to have to help too. Can I count on your help? Yes, sir, Stanley said. Mr. Budensky said, good, and patted Stanley on the back. Two boys each carrying a shovel were coming across the compound. Mr. Budensky called to them. Rex, Alan, I want you two to say hello to Stanley. He's the newest member of their team. The boys glanced weirdly at Stanley. They were dripping with sweat. Their faces were so dirty that it looked like Stanley for a moment to notice that one kid was white and the other black. What happened to Barf Bag? Asked the black kid. Lewis is still in the hospital, said Mr. Budensky. He won't be returning. He told the boys to come shake Stanley's hand or introduce himself like gentlemen. Hi, the white kid grunted. That's Alan, said Mr. Budensky. My name is not Alan, the boy said. It's Squid, and that's X-Ray. Hey, said X-Ray. He smiled and shook Stanley's hand. He wore glasses, but they were so dirty that Stanley wondered how he could see out of them. Mr. Budensky told Alan to go to the rec hall and turn the other boy to meet Stanley. Then he led him inside the tent. There were 7 cots, each one less than 2 feet and one next to it. Which was Lewis's cot? Mr. Budensky asked. Barf Bag slept here, said X-Ray, kicking at one of the beds. All right, Stanley, that'll be yours, said Mr. Budensky. Stanley looked at the cot and nodded. He wasn't particularly thrilled about sleeping in the same cot that had been used by somebody named Barf Bag. 7 crates were stacked into 2 piles on one side of the tent. The open end of the crates faced outward. Stanley put his backpack, change of clothes, and towel in what he used to Barf Bag's crate, and at the bottom of the stack had been 3 in it. Stood to turn to the other 4 boys. First 3 were introduced to Mr. Budensky as Jose, Theodore, and Ricky. They called themselves Magnet, Armpit, and Zigzag. They all have nicknames, explained Mr. Budensky. However, I prefer to use the names their parents gave them. The names the society will recognize them by when they return home, become useful and hard-working members of society. It wasn't just a nickname, X-Ray told Mr. Budensky. He tapped the rim of his glasses. I can see you. I can see inside you. Mom, you've got a big, fat heart. The last boy either didn't have a real name or else he didn't have a nickname. Both Mr. Budensky and X-Ray called him Zero. You know why his name's Zero? Asked Mr. Budensky. Because there's nothing inside his head. He smiled and playfully shook Zero's shoulder. Zero said nothing. And that's Mom, a boy said. Mr. Budensky smiled at him, as if to make you feel better to call me Mom. Theodore, go ahead and call me Mom. He turned to Stanley. If you have questions, Theodore will help you. You got that, Theodore? I'm dependent on you. Theodore spit a thin line of saliva between his teeth, causing some of the other boys to complain that he needed to keep their home sanitary. You were all new here once, said Mr. Budensky, and you all know what it feels like. I'm counting on every one of you to help Stanley. Stanley looked at the ground. Mr. Budensky left the tent, and soon the other boys began to file out as well, taking their towels and change of clothes with them. Stanley was relieved to be left alone. He was so thirsty that he felt he would die if he didn't get something to drink soon. Hey, Theodore, he said, going after him. Do you know where I can fill my canteen? Theodore whirled and grabbed Stanley in the collar. My name's not Theodore, he said. It's Armpit. He threw Stanley to the ground. Stanley stared up at him, terrified. Where's the water spigot on the wall in the shower stall? Thanks, Armpit, said Stanley. He watched the boy turn and walk away. He couldn't get the life of him to figure out why anyone would want to be called Armpit. In a way, it made him feel a little better about having to sleep in a cot that was used by somebody named Barf Bag. Maybe it was a term of respect. Oh, man. Remembering all this stuff, like the names, the characters, and such, it's so rejuvenizing. And honestly, this is such a short read, actually, that we are already 1/10 of the way done. That's not even a joke, because this book is only 233 pages. Okay, well, 1/12. Whatever, this is still a pretty short book. So we can finish this in 12 days, which I'll do when I'm back. But yeah. I hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day. People like beef fishing. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope wherever you are right now, you're doing good. Bye-bye.